for the praise. Hallelujah. It is well with my soul. Hallelujah. Sometimes we don't understand the mechanics of Yahweh's word, but that word soul is a little bit different than my spirit, man. The soul is the seat of my emotions and intellect, and my mind is what dictates what happens in this fleshly vessel. And so if my mind is being renewed, regardless of what is going on around me, it is indeed well with my soul. Hallelujah. Give him praise. My goodness. What a powerful season we're living in. And as Shepherd John was saying just a few minutes ago, I am convinced with everything that's inside me that we are living in a season when Abba's revealing something multidimensional outside the scope of what we've been accustomed to in his word. And I'm going to make a declaration here this afternoon. You are, if I can borrow the theme from the old original Star Trek, you are about to go where no man has ever gone before. I challenge you, if you're listening this evening, maybe you're listening live via Facebook, YouTube, or maybe you'll listen to this recording. I want to remind you that everything in Abba's word is established in the mouth of two witnesses. I'm going to give you far more than two witnesses. But I also laid down the gauntlet in front of you, and I say that you need to do what 2 Timothy 2:15 says. Don't take my word for it, okay? Don't take my word for it. Make sure that you take the truth of his word and you rightly divide that truth. And when you rightly divide it, let me share this with you. When these winds come and the storms begin to howl and the seas begin to raise their head, you can say, it is well with my soul, because I have a solid foundation. You believe that? If you'll allow me and indulge me for a little while, I want to look at this week's Torah portion. This is a powerful parsha. It follows on the heels of the last of the great Holy Spring convocations called Shavuot. And if you've looked at this Torah portion, it begins in Numbers chapter 4, verse 21 through chapter 7, verse 89. And the title of the parsha is Naso, and it means literally to elevate. Turn to your neighbor and tell him, you're about to be elevated. Amen. You're about to be elevated. It also can mean to lift up, to bear up, to support, to carry something, and to bear it continuously. And it's not an accident that this particular word, Naso, is the word that's used as the title of this Torah portion. And this one singular word, it's amazing to me how powerful the Hebrew language is. Because it's not like English or Spanish or any other language spoken in this earth. The Hebrew language is so, again, multidimensional that it's able to reveal to you the mind and the intellect of the Creator. In fact, in Isaiah, we're told that his ways and his mind are higher than our ways. But we're also admonished to let this mind be in you, which was also in our Messiah Yeshua. Gird up the loins of your mind. And so it's definitely something that we're able to access, the mind of the Father, and you can access it through the Hebrew language if you'll take the time to just extricate the things that he has embedded, hidden, buried in there. It's not rocket science. It's not something that's hard. It just means you got to get up off your lazy backside, and instead of taking the word that somebody else has been sharing and taking that for its face value, go back and see for yourself, okay? And so it's not an accident that this one single word, Naso, literally sums up the vocational inheritance of the house of Levi, at least as it regards the wilderness tabernacle and everything it has to do with that wilderness tabernacle. And if this word does, in fact, sum up the nature and the characteristic of the house of Levi, let me share this with you. They understood at that particular time in creation, they understood that the Hebrew language was prophetic. And so when they would name, if you'll allow, their children a specific name, it carried a prophecy in it that they had understood from the generations before them, and they were thinking forward, they were thinking generationally, and so they understood the name that I'm about to apply to my child and my children's children are going to help to flesh out the prophecy that's been given to us as a family. And so there's a vital connection here with this word Naso in the Hebrew language and the vocation of the sons of Levi. And so I think it's to our best interest if we want to find out about the priestly system. And most people will take the New Testament where it says that we have been called to be kings and priests and align that particular phrase with the house of Levi. And we're going to share some things that's going to make some people scratch their head, maybe make people mad with me. And I'll be honest with you, I've been around long enough that doesn't bother me too much. What I want to do is make sure that I share what Abba gives me. That is what bothers me. If I don't share the truth of what he's given me, then I get concerned. And so what I'm about to share with you probably is going to affect your particular paradigm, not only about the house of Levi, the priestly system as it relates to the coming third temple that's on the horizon, but also your particular role as a king and priest vis-a-vis how it would relate to the house of Levi, or if it does at all. Now, I want to look at that word Naso. It's actually written with the Nun, Sheen, Aleph, but it's closely related. If you understand cognate words and letters that sound alike, like the Sheen and the Samic, well, it's closely related to Nun, Samic, Hey. Nasa, Naso, Nasa. Only the vowel points changing here gives you a little bit more of an understanding of how that word should be pronounced and then how it be used. But you also have to understand that context will also determine the definition of a word, or the definition of a word will help to determine the context within how it's used in that particular text. And so Nasa has a wide meaning. And so you can say Nasa and Naso as it relates to the house of Levi. It means to test, to try or to prove them, to tear down. Sometimes you need your sacred cows torn down. To pull out. Sometimes you need old weed seed removed. Say amen. And in fact, this word Nasa is only seen one time, and it's seen in the book of Ezra. Ezra was the scribe. Ezra knew the Torah probably, I want to say better, but at least as well as anyone else in the Tanakh, simply because he was tasked with taking the Hebrew language and the Hebrew letters and all of the little nuances of the Hebrew letters and conveying them to the people in a written form. When it's seen there in Ezra 6, it's indicating to take a beam of wood from the house of a person who has committed an offense and take that particular beam of wood, like you'd see in this particular edifice, this structure here. You take this beam of wood out, and if it was my personal house and I had committed an offense against the nation, then that particular beam would be used as part of my execution. It would be used to crucify or impale me on it. Wow, did you hear what I just said? Do you think of that you might could recall someone who was impaled on a beam in order to sacrifice himself for a house that had been offensive to Abba? It reminds us of our Messiah, Yeshua. And so as we begin to look at this word Nasa, you literally are beginning to pull back a curtain that you can look on the other side of this particular dimension you've been accustomed to, and it's going to reveal a deeper dimension of who Levi was and the service of Levi. Now, we have to look really closely because traditionally this word Naso is emphasized in regard to taking the sum or the numbering. In other words, a census, if you will, of the sons of Levi. And it's important because Levi's obligations and the hierarchy, the pecking order of the sons of Levi, are actually the central focus of this particular Torah portion. So why would Yahweh speak to Moshe and say, Naso, these sons of Levi? Elevate, pull down, tear down, remove. Come on, you need to look at all of these particular nuances in the definitions as it relates to the central subject of what we're talking about, because it will help you to understand exactly what's happening rather than what your traditions have told you. Traditions are good if traditions are used as a teaching tool that you can put up against the word of Abba and measure it. But if you can't measure it against the word of Yahweh, then you need to set your tradition aside. And a lot of the things that we've had grandfathered down to us in the day that we're living in now, these traditions have helped us to form the paradigms of what we believe is about to happen. How many of you believe that we're living in the end times? Well, all of end time prophecy, at least as far as I've been able to study over the last 40 years, seem to be somehow intricately connected with the role of the house of Levi and the sons of Levi, that priestly system, and the system that they had in charge over, the sacrificial system, and a coming third temple. All of that is prophetically ensconced, literally wound up, if you will, inside the role of Levi. I need to know exactly what his role was, especially if maybe I've misunderstood some things, because misunderstanding is going to affect my direction. Did you hear me? Now, if you take that word Nasa or Naso, and remember it's the Nun, Shin, Aleph, and you just take those same letters and you rearrange them to Aleph, Nun, Shin, you have the word Enosh. And so if I was to tell you that to Naso Levi and the sons of Levi, those same three letters, the inherent meaning of those letters never change. And so I could also say Enosh Levi. Did you hear that? Well, the word Enosh is the Hebrew word that's used to identify man in a number of instances throughout the scriptures, but it specifically indicates a frail man, a weakly man, prone to sickness and disease in his body and in need of healing, a man who has death working in him. And so I can't separate elevating, numbering, removing, tearing down, lifting up, counting the heads of Levi from the fact that he is also being identified here, at least as in some degree, to an individual or an entity that is weak and frail and has death working in it. Can you see that? And so I have to ask yourself, is there something in this parsha that has some hidden information regarding the lifting up of an Enosh or a frail man? And is it possible we can find some information hidden here that will identify who this quote-unquote man was and who this man is at present? And I believe that there's a direct connection to the house of Levi and the identification of who this Enosh man was. And if you will remember, as we've discussed over a number of occasions over the years, we believe that the wilderness tabernacle was actually designed in the form of or patterned after this fallen man, this frail Enosh man that was in need of restoration and healing. I've said this for years, that I believe that the tabernacle man was actually formed in the pattern of the Adam after the fall. The Adam after the fall was an Enosh man, not Enoch. Don't get the two words confused. Enosh. The Adam after the fall, turn to your neighbor and tell him, you are patterned after that first Adam. You are an Enosh man outside a blood covenant relationship with our Messiah Yeshua. You are a man that's frail, weak, sickly, and death is working in you. Can you see that? And so, understanding this should help us to understand the role of Levi, because Levi was set in the office as the caretaker of the wilderness tabernacle. And if the wilderness tabernacle was in fact designed in the form of a man, a wilderness tent, you can go back and see the correlation between the word skin for skin, and you can understand that the wilderness tabernacle literally was a pattern of a skin tent like I walk around in right now. This is a skin tent. Adam and Eve were the first two physical, carnal, fleshly individuals in the earth to walk around in a skin tent called a tabernacle. And so Levi was given charge of this pattern in the wilderness, and Levi was called to be the custodian. How many of you know what a custodian is? A janitor, to simplify the term. A custodian is one who has the responsibility for the personal care of something that he's been given charge of. Levi was the custodian responsible for the 10th man, and if he was responsible, then I have to ask you, how long did that responsibility that Levi was charged with last? And oh my goodness, here's where feathers get really ruffled, because a lot of people argue that Levi's role was eternal. And I will agree to a certain extent. I will agree that as long as that fallen tabernacle man is the pattern that we must look at, then Levi is still his caretaker. On the other hand, if you can agree with me that the wilderness tabernacle was also, if he was a pattern of the fallen Adam, and Yeshua became as the last Adam to repair, to lift up, to tear something out, to tear something down, and to restore the original pattern of the tabernacle man. And if Yeshua destroyed the powers of sin, death, hell, and the grave, then the pattern we have now is an example of a resurrected tabernacle man. And if that's the case, it requires a new custodian. Did you hear what I just said? Why does it require someone with a different dimensional relationship with Yahweh? Because you cannot have a resurrected, perfected man with a corrupt custodian. Did you hear that? And so it requires a new officiant, a new custodian, a new priesthood, a new order. I believe this order comes along in the guise of, or after the semblance of, the order of Melchizedek. And I know, again, people get upset by that. And this is really a delicate subject, and we're going to move as carefully as we can. But I'm going to attempt to show you the Levitical duty, the Levitical role that he was supposed to play, and the heritage that was his as it related to his charge as the custodian of the temporary Enosh man. Does this make sense to you? I'll back up and relook at it if you can't get this. I would suggest you get the notes, go back and listen to this, because I'm telling you, you're going to hear some things. I wrote this down. I took this dictation as best that I could, and I'm telling you, I heard some things from Abba that I've never heard before, but I'm convinced that this is the truth, and truth can stand scrutiny. And so I want to begin in Numbers chapter 1, verse 53, and this is the role of Levi. Again, you need to back off. Sometimes we get tunnel vision and we can't see the forest for the trees. You're right on top of the subject. Sometimes you need to get back away so that you can get more of a bird's eye view of your subject, so that you can see things that sometimes you get comfortable being around and you just can't or not willing to see. Are you listening? And so this verse in Numbers chapter 1 tells us the Levites, say that with me, Levites, shall pitch round about the tabernacle of testimony. Now you need to highlight this. If you're uncomfortable in marking in your Bible, then you need to make yourself some notes. You need to highlight this particular phrase. Shall pitch round about the tabernacle of testimony. Why? Why were they charged with pitching around, camping around the tabernacle? The next phrase tells you, so that there will be no wrath upon the congregation of the children of Israel. And as a result, Levites are going to be called to keep the charge of the tabernacle of the testimony. Stop right there. And let me just break it down as simple as I can. Levi is told to camp around the tabernacle for the express purpose of preventing the wrath of Yahweh, whatever that reason is. We're going to look at it, but they're to camp around the tabernacle to keep the wrath of Yahweh from falling on the rest of the nation. Now I need to know what was wrong, what was happening that could cause wrath to fall on the rest of the nation. Okay? So we're going to look at that. Now, as we've talked before, And I believe Andrew Hoy does a great job. Go back and look at Project 314. I believe he does a great job in helping to expound some things that we don't have time to even begin to look at today. But we believe that the tabernacle was fashioned, and I'm talking about the wilderness tabernacle, was fashioned in a cyclical, circular pattern. Why do I believe that? Because Moshe was given a pattern, and now it says the pattern is what you see in the heavens. Okay? The pattern in the heavenlies is cyclical. And I will share this with you. Everything that occurs in nature is cyclical. If you go out in nature and you find something that has squared corners, it's man-made. Okay? And so, based on the tribal alignment that we were just looking at, Levites shall camp around the tabernacle tent. They would have, if the tabernacle is in fact circular, as I believe it is, then they would have also formed a circle around a circular tent, a wheel around a wheel. Where have I heard that before? It seems as if Ezekiel discusses it, especially as it regards the future prophetic relationship with this coming temple that I believe is not this third temple construction project already being started. Are you hearing me? Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel. And so if Levi is camped in a circular pattern around a circular vestige called a tent, listen to me, it would have actually effectively closed off access to this wilderness tent to everybody else. Levi was to camp around this tent to keep anybody else from any of the other 12 or 11 tribes from having access to the tabernacle. Why? Yahweh says, if they have access to this tabernacle, my wrath is going to fall on them. Can you imagine the weight and the responsibility on the house of Levi, knowing that the people want access to the Creator, they want access to His presence. But if they have access to His presence because of their current condition, they're going to die. And so Levi has been given a solemn charge. Think about that. Now, it's also an established fact that the other 11 tribes would have encircled Levi. So you would have smaller and smaller circles, or larger and larger circles as you get out. You would have the circular tent. You would have had Levi, and then you would have had the other 11 tribes at the 4 compass points, north, south, east, and the west, in a circular alignment, also around Levi and the tabernacle. As we looked at this and preparing for this teaching, I'm telling you, there's some things that I would have to literally get up out of my seat, go away from there, and I couldn't talk to anybody else in the house at the moment because they're thinking he's a lunatic. So I would talk to the other only lunatic that I knew, and that was me. I'd talk to myself, are you hearing what are you looking at this? And so the only other person that I knew that was accustomed to being called crazy was Shepherd John. So I'd say, have you seen this? And then I would go back and I would put this stuff down. This word here for pitch, to pitch their tent, is not like taking a horseshoe and pitching horseshoes. It actually is the word chana, Strong's number 2583, and it's translated in a variety of ways. Most people believe it means to take and literally, as we would commonly say, pitch a tent. To incline, to encamp, to bend down, to decline. But the primary meaning of this word chana actually conveys the idea of the sun's rays as it declines or decreases or deteriorates as the evening progresses. Remember this, because you've never connected this with the definition of the camping order of the children of Israel, in particular Levi. Now, this word kana is also closely related. You need to learn to look at these cognate or related words. Let me just share this with you. I'll try and make it as simple as I can. If you look at me, you can see my particular facial appearance. If you look at my children, you can see my children have their own particular facial structure and facial appearance, but my children will look like me as well. And grandchildren will resemble me to a certain extent. Does that make sense to you? And so when you see these cognate, and I know some of y'all are saying, poor children, poor grandchildren. But I'm just using this as an illustration because you need to learn to look at these related words like you would children and grandchildren, because if you look at my children and my grandchildren, they will tell you a lot more about me than you could ever know just knowing who I am. And so you need to learn to look at these cognate related words. And this word kanan means to be gracious, favored, pitied, shown consideration, to bend or to stoop down in kindness to someone who's an inferior, and to show compassion to them. Remember, we're talking about Levi's role in camping around the tabernacle, okay? It's more than just, okay, we're going to go pitch our tent here. This is what we were instructed to do. Go get the tents, boys, and let's just set these tents up. Pitch roundabout. The phrase roundabout comes from one Hebrew word, saviv, and it means a circuit, a circle. Wait a second. Pitch in a circle. Did you hear that? It comes from the root savav, which indicates to turn about, to turn around, to turn aside. And this is mind-staggering here, but it also can hint that as I'm being obedient to pitch my tent in a circular fashion, that the reason I'm here is because I'm an instrument of change. I'm going to help to reverse and to return whatever it is I'm camping around or about to a different era or a different time frame. Okay? And then there's that word wrath. You camp this way. If you don't camp this way, then my wrath will fall on the nation of Israel. That word wrath there comes from the word ketsef, which means wrath, anger, but it also indicates to break or splinter a twig off of a branch. And so if they don't camp around this tabernacle in a specific order, it means that this group behind them is going to be broken off. What happens if you are broken off the living branch? I am the vine, you the branches. If you abide in me and my word abide in you, listen to me, if you're not abiding in him, you're broken off, you're a dead branch. Once you're broken off the life source, there is no life working in you. You got to keep this in your mind because this is important. Now look at the word charge. They were given this charge. It's the Hebrew word mishmeret, and it's defined as to guard, to watch, and preserve, but context drives this particular vehicle. In the context here, the root of mishmeret is the word mishmar, and it hints at a place of confinement, a guard post. Hold up a second. A guard post is set up around a place of confinement. They're being charged with setting up a circular guard post around the tabernacle, and it's telling you that the tabernacle is a place of confinement. Whatever is in this tabernacle has to be confined, and you need to guard it, because if you don't keep whatever's in this tabernacle confined, those that are outside your circle coming in contact with whatever I have confined in this tabernacle are going to experience my wrath. That's heavy, yeah. All right? And so this is actually hinting that the Levites had the custody of this tabernacle man, listen to me, and that this tabernacle man is also in a season of confinement. Remember, we said he's in the flesh. He is a fleshly Enosh man, right? And so he's confined. Listen, you need to grasp the picture here. This is the pattern from Adam's fall forward. We are literally imprisoned in this flesh. And we are confined in this flesh until such time as someone can come in contact with us who can reverse, who can change, and who can release us. You see that? And so this is Levi's role. Levi is actually standing in the role of a pseudo-Messiah. They're here to make sure to guard this man who's confined into this fleshly tent dwelling until such time as the man can be released from his carnal fleshly chains. Does that make sense? And so, again, look at my notes. You correct me if you think I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like the Levites are camped, literally encircling or embracing, if you will, a tabernacle that represents a corrupted, frail, Enosh man who has death working in him, and this tent man is in need of redemption. If it's a pattern of the fallen Adam, Adam needs redemption. Turn to your neighbor and tell him we needed redemption. And without doubt, this tabernacle man is a temporal vessel. That wilderness tent was a temporal vessel. And it's depicted, based on the context, based on the language, in a declining, deteriorating condition. This temple or tabernacle man had death working in him. Here's where people would get upset. But if you offer up sacrifices and blood is shed inside a tent, then that tent has death working in it. And if you want to argue that point, then I would suggest that you stop celebrating the fall festival of Sukkot, because the fall festival of Sukkot is a memorial of when we were in a temporary mobile vessel in the wilderness. It's a shadow picture of this carnal tent that we were dwelling in, and Yahweh reminds us every Sukkot that there is coming a day when you're going to be set free and released from that. That's what Sukkot's all about. Okay? And so Israel as a nation followed this same pattern. Israel as a nation camped in temporary booths or tents that represent a temporary tent vessel of their own flesh, and they were there in it, we call it the blessed hope, but it's actually the expectation of a future resurrected body. That's the great hope. That's what we long for. Listen to me, like it or not, you are confined to this tent. You can't get out of this skin unless you die or unless you're resurrected. Say amen. Oh, what about out-of-body experiences? You're talking about something there that's a little bit different from what we're alluding to in this particular teaching. Hello. This is pretty important. I think that what Yahweh is doing is trying to teach us something about what we're expecting to happen in the days ahead. And so based on what we've extrapolated from these definitions, the Levites were charged with embracing, encircling that tabernacle or tent man until he turns back, until that tent man was changed, his condition reversed, and that tent man was able to return to his Edenic form. That's what the pattern was. Listen to me. I remember years ago teaching a series on Back to Eden. One day, as a group of people, as an individual, we are going to go back to Eden. We'll be in an Edenic condition, and we will literally be put back inside the body of Messiah. Right now, we can vocalize prophetically that we are members of the body of Messiah. Physically, we are not right now. Spiritually, we are. Does that make sense? Well, this is exactly the pattern that you see in the wilderness tabernacle. Does that make sense to you? And so, from what we've just looked at so far, you can surmise that Levi was then to function as an intermediary. He was a mediator between who? Yahweh, Israel, and this tent man. Because if Israel comes in contact with this tent man, they encounter the anger of Yahweh and they become a broken off branch. And so, literally, Levi has an honorable position. But do you really know the exact role of Levi? And can you really answer, does he still have that role, or has the role of Levi changed? Well, let me just reiterate before we go any further. The consensus of everybody that I know that calls himself a scholar is that Moshe was given the pattern of the tabernacle. Everybody could acknowledge that. And the pattern of the tabernacle was to be patterned. It was a blueprint after, or in the manner like after the order of Melchizedek, after the order of the pattern in the luminaries in the stellar heavens. And I also believe that what you saw in the stellar luminaries that would have been given to Moshe as a pattern here in the earth was the form of the fallen Adam in need of redemption. Go and look at Exodus 25, verse 9. And if you look at the language and the structural context of the language, listen to me carefully. Everything that's talked about as having to do with the tabernacle would also include the furnishings, its functions, who would officiate in the tabernacle or the priesthood, what would be found within the influence and the effect of this pattern. And if you try to separate any of the above that I just mentioned, one from the other, it was an exercise in futility. I can't separate the furnishings from the function. I can't separate the officiates or the priesthood from the tabernacle. And I can't separate those who are going to be influenced and affected by this pattern from the tabernacle. You just can't do it. And so you have to be able to look at it in proper context to understand what's being shown you. But I'm just going to be honest with you. There are a lot of people out there, when they consider the idea of even broaching this subject, and you ask them to look at it outside their traditional viewpoint and to consider the Levitical priesthood in the future as it relates to this coming third temple. And if you try to tell them that the Levitical priesthood's future, if they're not careful, is one still connected to that dead man's pattern, the wilderness tent, which was a tent of dead works. And that what Levi is attempting to do with the third temple is still connected to the wilderness tabernacle and has nothing to do with the resurrected temple man pattern of Yeshua. Are you listening to me? In fact, if the temple was built today, if the Catholics revealed everything that had been hidden, if they founded the Ark of the Covenant, and if they put all of that inside a third temple, the living man, the living Ark of the Covenant would not be there and would not be welcome, and neither would you unless you convert to that Judaic system. And I'm not against the Jews. I'm not against our brothers. I'm just telling you that there's something that needs to be understood if you want to go back and see the truth of what Abba's word is. Now, if you consider what I just said to you, then it's regarded as an attack on the third temple. Don't speak against the temple. Don't speak against the Kohanim. Everybody's doing these DNA blood tests and they're saying, you know, I know a lot of people that say that they can trace their bloodline all the way back to the Kohanim. If they're not Kohanim, then they're probably Levites. But it's also considered an attack on the altar. Don't speak against the altar. And not only that, but against a lot of other fundamental traditions that are held close to the heart by the Jews, the Messianics, the Hebrew roots, and a lot of the Christian brothers. And if you attempt to offer what we're looking at today, what I consider a Melchizedek perspective of a living stones tabernacle or a living stones tent rather than a wilderness Enosh man tent, and a new system, a new priestly system that has to have the custody of the living stones tabernacle, is considered heresy, and you are considered to be confrontational and nobody wants to have anything to do with you. But it's my opinion that almost all of end-time prophecy is viewed through the lens of the reestablishment of this coming Levitical system and a third temple sacrificial temple. But what if this has been wrong? There are some out there that will skirt around that and say, you know, the priest, and there's the priestly system that will officiate in Ezekiel's temple and the living stones tabernacle are going to be the sons of Zadok. But isn't that interesting? Zadok comes from the word Zadik, Melech Zadik. The sons that will officiate will be the sons of righteousness. Amen? Well, it's my contention that answers to all of these questions lie in what I consider some buried treasures of truth that have been, and most of the time I believe, intentionally hidden from us. But these truths will withstand scrutiny. Traditions, most of the time, will not. Especially, and I'm just going to kick this one in the behind while I'm here. I don't give a rip about your archaeological evidence. You hear me? Because archaeological evidence is what promoted Darwin to where he's at and telling me that I came from an ape man because of all of the archaeological evidence that was compiled and used to form a tradition. And so if your tradition varies from the tenets of the Hebrew language embedded in the Torah, you built your house on sinking sand. That's going to leave a mark. Now, I want you to look at something that I believe by the individuals that are going to set themselves in opposition to us, they're going to consider what I'm about to share with you as scandalous at the very least. But we're going to look at Levi's role, and I've never heard this before. Numbers 1, verse 53b. Why was he told to camp around this tabernacle so that there would be no wrath upon the congregation of the children of Israel? I need to know that. I've never seen it, never asked that question. But doesn't it seem that if Levi's told to do this by pitching round about the tabernacle to prevent the wrath coming upon the Bnei Israel, that he's actually being asked to offer himself as the object of the above wrath in the stead of the sons of Israel? In other words, if something about this tabernacle, suppose that the podium here could suffice as a tabernacle. I know it's rectangular, okay? But suppose this is functioning as a tabernacle, and I'm told to camp around it so that you guys don't suffer the wrath of coming in contact with this podium. Well, it leads me to believe that something in here can affect you physically, mentally, and even bring the wrath of Yahweh on you if I come in contact with you. And if I'm the same kind of an individual, a mortal Enosh man like you are, and I am told to come in contact with this, and it means that, wait a second, I'm being told to come in contact with this contagion that's inside this vessel in order to keep death from working in you. Sounds almost like Messiah, doesn't it? Are you hearing me? Was the daily contact with the tabernacle man, and remember, the pattern reveals this tabernacle man in need of blood atonement, and deteriorating steady like the Enosh man. Was the daily contact with the tabernacle almost like a plague or a scourge of sorts, that unless shielded by Levi from it, the house of Israel would have had the wrath of Yahweh fall on them? The text tells you that. The text tells you that. You're getting some straight answers. And it may be found foreign to you, but there's some precedent that's in the Torah for just such a thing, and it's found in Numbers chapter 19, and it's regarding the ordinance of the red heifer, where one who had contacted death has death now working in him, and he's unclean. And so the one who's unclean comes to the high priest, and the high priest takes the ashes of the red heifer mingled with cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet and water, and he sprinkles the contaminated person. By an act of the sovereign will of Yahweh, that contaminated person, once he has been sprinkled with the blood, he now becomes clean, while the priest, who had been pure prior to that, now has taken that contagion on himself, and he's unclean. Again, confounded. Even Solomon himself, the wisest man said to have ever lived aside from Yeshua, was said to have been confounded by the ritual of the ordinance of the red heifer, and yet you and I can see that it's talking about Yeshua. It was the blood of Yeshua who would sprinkle us from dead things. And he alone could absorb the death and disease and destruction in him. Go back and read Isaiah, the last verses of Isaiah 52 and into Isaiah 53. And you can see that his visage was marred more than any man. Why? Because as he came in contact with us, he literally absorbed the leprous, dying condition of the Enosh man, took it on himself, and so that you could be set free from it. This is what's being shown here. Levi was a pseudo-Messiah in his role for a season. Now, there are some out there that will say, I just take exception that the tent could not have been an unclean place. But not one of them can argue against the fact that death worked inside the tabernacle in the form of animal sacrifice. And so if death is inside a vessel, then that vessel is considered dead or dying. And so the tent, in effect, represented a dead or dying man, just like that first Adam. Now, in light of this, I want you to consider this verse with me. Numbers chapter 19, verse 14. This is mind-staggering. But what it's going to do is going to help to expand your understanding. How many of you want to be dumbfounded? Numbers 19, verse 14 says, this is the Torah. Wait a second. Where'd you get that? Oh, I got that out of Reader's Digest. You just conjured this up yourself and made it fit what you were trying to bring to the people. You heretic, bringing your false teaching. No, I read it. It says this is the Torah. When a man dieth in a tent, all that come into the tent and all that is in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. What? A day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. If the tabernacle man, that tent, had death working in it, and it is clearly the pattern of the first Adam, then anyone who came in contact with that tent would be unclean for 7 days, 7,000 years, until death would be finally purged from the fleshly skin tent of man. I don't know if I believe that. Well, good grief, man. Go back and look at Genesis chapter 3. Yahweh creates a skin tent for Adam and Eve and called it the flesh. And from that time forward, no man could enter into this skin tent vessel without death working in him. No man could enter into this skin tent vessel and be considered clean, with the exception of Yeshua. Why? Yeshua had a different bloodline than what you and I do. We have Adam's bloodline. Yeshua had the bloodline of the Father. So Yeshua could come in here in this skin tent vessel and lawfully, legally, not be subject to death that would be working in it. You and I, on the other hand, from Adam forward, the DNA connection that we, as sons of Elohim, that Adam had, that DNA connection that Adam had, you and I no longer had it. It was abrogated. It had been broken. The DNA helix connecting you and I to Yahweh had been severed and broken, breached, if you will. That's why flesh, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, I believe it's around between 45 and verse 51 says, flesh and blood cannot inherit, that means obtain, cannot inherit the kingdom of Yahweh. Why? Because we're two different types of DNA. This is mind-staggering. Even Isaiah saw something far more than just a physical version of the future that we're talking about as it regards this pattern. Let me just tell you what Isaiah says about this. He starts off verse 26, and I'm not trying to take it out of context. Go back and read it. Moreover, in addition to what you've already heard me say, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun. He's talking about in the end days. It's talking about end time prophecy, okay? And the light of the sun shall be sevenfold, as the light of 7 days. In the day that Yahweh, listen to this, you ought to get ready to shout. in the day that Yahweh binds up the breach of his people and heals the stroke of their wound. Did you understand? There's going to come a day when the breach of our DNA, ours between us and Yahweh, is going to be healed, and the stroke of the wound between us, Yeshua took on our wounds. He took on the stripes. He was beaten, chastised, so that our peace could be restored. That's a mind stagger. Now, I want you to remember this connection with the sun and the moon, because I'm going to show you something along with that that'll make you cry. Let's look at the word breach. It's the word savar. You get the word saber, as in a sword drawn. What's a saber for? It's to sever something. It's our English word sever that comes from this word sabar. Breach is a severing. It means a fracture. The breaking of something, and I saw this and I said, my goodness. As in the breaking of a dream. How many of you have ever had a vision or a dream, and it seems as if that vision or dream had been broken, but you hold fast to it, and you know that Yahweh is a repairer of the breach, a restorer of the path to dwell in. It reminded me of Jacob's dream. Jacob's DNA had been breached. Go back and look at it. Jacob was about to go into a place where an attempt to commingle his DNA with that of Laban would be presented in front of him. And you can go find out later on that Jacob actually creates a place of healing and restoration miraculously, where peeled rods are set in front of his flock, and it literally alters and changes the DNA of the flock. And I'm convinced that it was a shadow picture of what Yahweh was about to do with the sons of Jacob, as Jacob would excise himself from Laban and move forward. Let's look at some more evidence. Psalm 51, verse 5. Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. The word for shapen there is the word hul. It means to twist, to turn around, a circle or something in a spiral. You and I were created literally in a circle. We were born in a round tent womb with the twisted DNA helix of the first Adam's sinful condition working in us. Are you listening to me? For 7 days or 7,000 years, we're going to be unclean until such time as the final DNA of that curse is reversed at the close of the millennial kingdom. There's only one way that you can remedy that at present, and that's to come in contact with the blood of the priest called the Melchizedek, Yeshua our Messiah, who can sprinkle you with the blood and therefore stave off that death working in your spirit man, but your fleshly man still will lay down and die. It has death working in it. Following that same pattern, the one of a fallen man and his need for a redeemer, the Levites, it would seem, became a living sacrifice that was to be offered in the stead of Israel. If Israel comes in contact with it, they die. And so someone has to keep that death from working in the rest of the nation. And so Levi was supposed to be a living sacrifice. This was a foreshadowing of the role of the coming of Messiah. In that particular role, they alone could prevent the scourge of death, the wrath of Yahweh, from enveloping the nation by themselves being willing to take on the nation's uncleanness for a season. However, clearly unlike Messiah, the distinction between the custodians of that fleshly tabernacle body had death working in them, and so Levi and his role could never completely expunge the debt of sin. He could only set that punishment off for a season until such time as someone would come in the guise of that skin tent without any death working in him, and that's our Messiah, Yeshua. It is Yeshua who alone bore the light or blood of Yahweh in his DNA, and therefore was able to circumvent the curse and repair the breached DNA of Adam, the last Adam. That ought to make you shout. The Levites and their sacrificial animal blood death system could never completely atone for the sins of the nation and could never effectively break the power of death, hell, or the grave from off the people. They could only mitigate it or postpone the wrath of Yahweh as described above for a short period, and then the whole process had to be started over anew. Once a year, they would have to come back into the holy place on the Day of Atonement. But throughout the course of the week, on a daily basis, anyone that came in contact with the contagion had to go through that process because they were never completely expunged from that debt. Does that make sense? And so it became necessary for Messiah to come and change the process by offering himself in the same tabernacle pattern, a skin tent that would lay down and die, yet without sin, because if there had been sin in him, death could have held him. But since death could not hold him and presented no threat of contamination to him or those who would be sprinkled with his blood, he then became the high priest of a different tabernacle, not made with hands, a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. And if he became the picture of this resurrected tabernacle man, instituting a new and perfect high priestly order, that of the living stones tabernacle man, if he was still in the custody of a corrupt Levitical priesthood, and when I say corrupt, I'm not talking about committing crimes, I'm talking about still having death working in them, they could not have been officiating alongside of perfection as long as death is working in them. That's why the whole pattern was instituted to begin with. Okay? In fact, if Levi would embrace the sacrifice of Yeshua and acknowledge that it's the blood of Yeshua that cleanses them from all unrighteousness and not the sacrificial institution of bloodletting from the animals, they could have been absorbed into a new higher priestly system as well, called that Melchizedek system. You know now why they were highly contesting Yochanan the Immerser and Yeshua. Go figure. What happens to Yochanan the Immerser after he passes on the role of the priesthood to Yeshua? He was not held in favor, thrown in jail, and later killed. Instead, this is what blows my mind. Rather than continuing to ascend and rise to the pinnacle of the Melchizedek order, officiating a living stones tabernacle, which is what you are about to understand. This is your charge. This is your mandate. You're priests, kings and priests, and you're to officiate this living stones tabernacle. Are you listening to me? So rather than that, they wanted to return back to the former dead works of animal blood sacrifice, and they want to bring that in and to continue to officiate in that pattern, in this dead pattern of a third temple man. And so to bring that back is actually a declaration, a formal declaration in the earth of their personal disbelief in the atoning work of our Messiah, and it discredits them from any priestly service. They're disgraced. Why? Because they have intentionally chosen to become tainted with death once again and rejected life. The coming of Yeshua required an entirely new priesthood. A new priesthood that would officiate a tabernacle not made with hands. Listen to me carefully. This tabernacle not made with hands is after the semblance or order of Messiah and Melchizedek. The same priesthood who in the fashion of Levi, listen to me, now we have a living stones tabernacle. Now, just like Levi camping round a circular tent in the wilderness, the new priesthood, the Melchizedek order has been, listen to me, you need to hear this carefully, because wrath can still affect those outside the house. And you and I need to serve as a mediator between those that have death working them and the source of life, and telling, listen, be reconciled to Yahweh. In fact, that was Levi's ministry. They had a ministry of reconciliation. This is powerful. This is just powerful. We're talking about a tabernacle not made with hands. In fact, I can show you that the first tabernacle that was actually physically built in the earth in the form of the Adam was the Adam himself, and you can see it in Genesis chapter 2. Yahweh takes Adam and he forms his body. He literally forms the first tabernacle made with hands. And that tabernacle made with hands becomes an Enosh man and falls. Why? Because that tabernacle man was prone to the flesh. On the other hand, in Genesis 1:26, just prior to that, Yahweh created a living stone spiritual tabernacle when he said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness. And this man will be fruitful, multiply, replenish, subdue, and have dominion. How? By vocalizing the living word of Yahweh rather than bringing themselves down to the lower confines of the flesh and birthing sons out of their own loins. Can you see the distinction? That's why there's not going to be a tabernacle made with hands that will have the indwelling presence of the Most High in it. He's not going back to that. Can you say amen? My goodness. It set in motion a priesthood. When Yahweh created the Adam, he set in motion a priesthood, a Melchizedek priesthood. And Adam had the choice to accept the eternal role of the Melchizedek order or officiate in a system of death. And Adam chose the latter in Genesis chapter 3. The Levites are doing the same thing as we speak. Could y'all hear that? Reverting back to that system, which is an impure system and it represents a dead tabernacle pattern, is going to be devastating to millions. But before, here, I've spent all this time, it seems as if I'm denigrating Levi and his role. Let me share this with you. Levi had a noble, high, and holy calling as a mediator between the nation of Israel and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. No matter how powerful, though, that calling that he had could never save the nation. And as a result, the nation could never, listen to me carefully, he's officiating as a mediator between the nation of Israel and that tent man, right? But no matter how powerful Levi's calling was, the nation of Israel and the tent man could never be one and live. Because if they come in contact with each other, Yahweh says, I'm bringing wrath, they die. So they can never be one. You see that? And so the sacrifice of Yeshua, by trying to reinstitute that system, the sacrifice of Yeshua and his blood atonement then becomes trampled underfoot by that system that would tell you, no, you can, all you need to do, in spite of what the Messiah's price was that he paid for you, you can go back and be reunited with death if you want it. The wrath of Yahweh now falls on Levi, listen to me, in establishing the third temple and reinstituting the temple sacrifices. The wrath of Yahweh will now fall on the house of Levi, and listen to me, and everyone that Levi presents to the system. And so what's going to happen when this third temple begins to be erected, we know that the Messiah is not long off. But I'm going to tell you something, by doing that, the efforts of Levi will only prolong the length of the time that the nation will be separated from them. It's going to prolong the length of time that there's a breach in the DNA, and they're going to be separated from their Messiah, the living tabernacle. And so the longer they're separated, the more souls will expire in the land, and the more wrath that's going to fall upon the nations. While that's happening, and while they're exposing them to this death, at the same time, the Melchizedek priesthood and those after that order are being allowed to officiate a new and living tabernacle, completing the pattern where the two go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, and the two, I'm talking about even before Genesis 2, where the woman's taken out of the man. I'm talking about Genesis 1:26, where we become echad with him, and we function as if we were conjoined together. This is identical to in my mind, the terrible fix that Adam and Eve would have been in after the fall. After the fall, Adam and Eve could never be echad, never be one body. We look at it and we see in Genesis chapter 2, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. As long as they're in the confines of the marriage relationship, we say that they are one. But you need to go back and look at that. They were echad, one in that role, as long as they continued to speak the word of Yahweh together and cause sons to be born. They had the ability to speak things into creation just like Yahweh did. Rather than do that, they condescended to the call of the flesh, and they began to attempt to produce fleshly sons like you see in Genesis chapter 3. It became a corrupted tent vessel. Can you see that? They breached the DNA of the Creator. They bent to the flesh. And Yeshua repairs that breach, and we're able then and only through Him become one in His body. Not by, listen to me, not by the fruit of your flesh. That's why no works will gain you access. It's only by the Spirit of His Word that will enable you to become echad, one with Him. Did Levi get a raw deal? We're talking about Naso, numbering the Levites. It seems as if you read this, it's almost a contradiction here. Because if you go back earlier in the book of Numbers, and chapter 1, verse 49, and chapter 2, verse 33, you find that Moshe had been instructed, do not number the tribe of Levi. But then in this Torah portion, it's saying Naso, which means to number, take a census. And so it seems almost if it's contradictory. Moshe is told in our parsha to number them. And in Numbers chapter 4, verse 2, he's told, take the sum of the number of the children of Levi after the house of their fathers. Take the sum of the sons of Kohath from among all the sons of Levi. So what brought about the apparent change? I'm telling you, it was prophecy that is being set in motion. Levi was named Levi for a reason. I'll show you why he's named Levi. Levi had 3 sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. They were named that to fulfill the prophetic element of their life. Listen to me. Turn to your neighbor and tell him, he's talking to you, you better listen now. You have a prophetic element on your life. You were created for the season you're living in right now, and there is a sure word of prophecy that has been declared over you. And that's why I'm very critical now when I see people naming their children with some off-the-wall funk that has absolutely no inherent meaning. They don't understand what they did. They don't understand what they're prophesying over their children and setting that prophecy in motion. Gershon, Kohath, Merari. How do they affect what I've been trying to present to you thus far? Let's look at Gershon. You guys are so astute. I'm glad you asked these questions. It's translated most often as exiled. It comes from that word garash, to be divorced, to drive out. Isn't that odd? First time you hear that is in Genesis chapter 3 when Yahweh Gershons, drives out, exiles, divorces the Adam from Eden. Strictly coincidental. The root of this word comes from gerish, which it hints at something that's thrust up or out of the Adamah. Where were they at in Eden? They were in the Adamah. They were what? Discharged from it, thrust out of it. It's only found one time, this word geresh. And it's found in Deuteronomy 13:14, and it relates to the blessing of Joseph. This blew my mind. It's relating to the blessings of Joseph and how his progeny, you'd be able to distinguish them as, listen to this, Joseph's children will be able to be distinguished as fruit brought forth by the sun and those that will be brought forth by the moon. That doesn't mean anything to you. I told you earlier to mark that down. You're going to see what this means. The phrase is Gerish Yerachim. Now, if you follow the pattern of creation, the sun represents the first Adam, the tabernacle of Elohim, and the light of creation's DNA that would emanate from him. Are you with me? The first Adam was a vessel of light. He was a sun, S-U-N. He had light emanating. He was a source of light, had light emanating from him. After the fall, Adam no longer had the ability to release light. He could only reflect light by times as the Spirit would come upon him. So he goes from being the sun to the moon. The moon represents the fallen man in the tabernacle or tent that has no light of its own in it. Why? Because the original DNA of light had been broken and breached. And so the tabernacle tent man could only reflect light. And so after that same pattern, Yeshua, the word of Elohim, I need some water. Pardon me. Yeshua, the word of Elohim, fulfilled the pattern of the sun created on the fourth day. Did you hear that? He had light emanating from him. But he also willingly chose to take on the fallen body tabernacle that had no light of its own, the moon. The moon then became a pattern set in the heavens where the moon's cycles would represent the death, burial, and resurrection. Death, burial, and resurrection. Did you hear that? A dark phase, a sliver, and a full moon of a fallen man with the potential to be redeemed. Gershon pictures that fallen man, the Ger, the stranger who had been exiled from the Adamah and would only be able to bring forth fruit through the offering. Remember Joseph? Through the offering of Mashiach ben Yosef. That blows my mind. Sometimes my mind is like the fuzz on a peach. It's hard to blow off, but some of y'all's got the fuzz like the dandelion. It's gone. Kohath. Are y'all getting anything out of this? I got 19 minutes. Oh my goodness, and 3 or 4 slides. The root of this word Kohath is normally defined as an assembly, to ally oneself with another, to gather together, like we're doing here. We're a Kohath. Okay? But I want you to look at the Kuf Vav root. That Kuf Vav root here hints at, oh, this is mind-staggering. It hints at a measuring line or a cord that's made from weaving several other cords into one. And if you look at the root of Kuf Vav, it's etymologically related to the Chet Vav root of Chava. Inside the Chava, the tent womb, you had the Chul, the infant, being woven together. That's what it talks about Jeremiah. Behold, before you were formed in your mother's womb, I knew you. You were knitted together in your mother's womb out of a cord of the DNA of Yahweh. But you had a strand inside that cord that came from the Adam, bringing the sinful nature of death on you. That cord has to be extricated. Okay? This root hints at life. We're talking about Kohath. Life being gathered into a tent, a womb. Merari. It's often translated because of the Memresh root as being bitter. And it hints at a constant flowing or dropping of something, drip, like rain dripping, drip, drip, drip. But it's interesting, listen to me. It's interesting because the root stem points at a change or an exchange that comes out of bitterness. After you've been through a test or a trial, change comes. This is mind-staggering because that same Memresh root that means bitterness also gives us the word myrrh. And myrrh is a unique spice above all others. It's associated with tabernacle incense. Why? Because there's something about the consummation of marriage inside that tabernacle. And if you go back and look at the Memresh root associated with myrrh, half of the occurrences of the word myrrh are found in the Song of Solomon, which is all about the husband and his bride and the unique relationship they have, echad, one with together. Oh, this is powerful. And so these sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, collectively were supposed to be a living blueprint before Israel, demonstrated the active role of the coming Messiah who would ransom the fallen man, Israel. And that he would take on, that they were supposed to take on his death in order to restore the man to his Edenic condition. This was the holy rollers. This was the holy calling that Levi had. Levi was supposed to, he had prophetic insight regarding that pattern, and Levi was supposed to be obedient to that pattern and take on that role in front of Israel all of the time that the tabernacle was there, demonstrating the coming of the fallen man who would ransom us from the dead works and restore us to the Edenic condition. We, the house of Israel and the people today, can never truly appreciate restoration if they had never experienced the bitterness of exile and the frailties of the Enosh man. And so that's why Yahweh took that skin tent man and put it in front of their eyes throughout the wilderness. The sons of Levi were called to teach the people how fragile life was and how fragile life existed in the form of that carnal tent man and point them towards the hope of becoming one with Messiah. That's mind staggering. There's not an accident in naming these sons. The purpose of their father Levi was to teach the sons. Listen to me carefully. And in teaching the sons, they all taught the nation of Israel about the middle wall of partition that separated them from the place of his presence, and to teach them about the breach of the Creator's DNA. While they themselves could never breach that wall, they were to cultivate an expectancy in the nation of one who would come. How were they supposed to do that? Because they were to physically demonstrate with their own lives in front of the nation a rehearsal of his coming. That's what Levi was called to do. And so that brings us to a look at the name Levi. And you've heard it 100 times probably. But you're going to see something today that you've not seen before. It actually comes from a Hebrew word root that means to be joined together and to be attendant upon. In other words, one who waits upon another. That was prophesied over Levi, one who waits, not wait as in you tarry until he comes. No, it means that you're attendant, you're the custodian, you're the one who takes care of another. Can you see that? It hints at borrowing, lending. But the ancient meaning of the word Levi actually comes from a root that indicates the uniting of two ends of a cord in a circular motion. To take and coil or twist them together as you would to place a crown or a garland upon the top of someone's head. The role of Levi was to be an eternal rewarded gift to the people. He was called to Levi. Why? Because he was teaching them about the role of Messiah. He was never called to usurp the role of the Melchizedek. And neither was Levi called to hinder the transition from the Levitical system to that of the Melchizedek order. He was not supposed to do that. Levi was supposed to be the connector of the two, to take the two dead ends and bring them together in the person of Messiah throughout an eternal rehearsal and show that the DNA had been repaired. That was Levi's charge. Levi was charged with taking two previously separated strands of DNA and showing how that they would become one in the person of Messiah. That was Levi's role. He had been entrusted with the covenant of peace, reconciling Israel to Yahweh as he attended this tabernacle skinned man. Levi could ultimately have lent himself to Yahweh and the nation while serving the two, Yahweh and his bride, inside the circle of that tent, following its pattern of redemption, repairing the breach of the DNA of the Creator through his word, Yeshua. Levi's role was the charge of passing the two severed ends of DNA to the high priest of a higher order. And he alone, the Melchizedek, Yeshua himself, was able to join the two severed, breached ends. Remember we talked about the word breached, seber? It also has the same Hebrew letters as the word basar, flesh. Taking the severed ends that were inside this tabernacle made with hand, the fleshly severed basar body. Basar, the good news, how you can be reconciled to him. How can I be reconciled? Corrupt DNA will no longer bring death in my life. The flesh is the effect of breaching the DNA of Elohim. As I said earlier, flesh and blood can never return you to the kingdom, neither can you inherit the kingdom. Only by walking in his spirit in anticipation of a prophetic rehearsal of our return to Eden and becoming one body with the Messiah can we expect to officiate this new priestly order as the sons of Zadok, the sons of the righteous one. Sadly, Levi became more focused on the animal sacrifice and his own ministry. His own ministry. Rather than being obedient simply to the pattern. Pride exalted his position, similar to that of Hillel ben Shachar in Isaiah 14:13. If you look at Levi, the value of Levi is Emah, the picture of the Aleph Mem, the Em, the Aleph man with the womb tent. Levi could have continued to function as custodian of the tent, man in need of a redeemer, until he arrived. Instead, Levi refused to relinquish his role after its season, and he sought to become, and today this is Levi's mindset, he has sought to become the source of redemption himself, exalting his own throne or altar or position upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north, the place where only the Melchizedek priest, Yeshua, could bring the blood. I hope you've enjoyed this particular teaching, because I'm telling you, this is mind-staggering. This is a word for you today. Thank you for listening. Shalom Aleichem.